The salty breeze swept across the deck of the Nautilus as I stood at the edge, staring out into the endless expanse of the Pacific Ocean. It was a clear day, the kind where the horizon blurs into the sky, making it hard to tell where one ends and the other begins. The water below was deceptively calm, a vast, tranquil blue that gave no hint of the abyss lurking beneath. Today was the culmination of years of preparation, study, and more sleepless nights than I cared to count. I felt a mixture of anticipation and dread as I thought about what lay ahead. The Mariana Trench had always been a place of fascination for me, an untouched frontier that held the promise of discoveries beyond our wildest imaginations. Yet, as I stood there, the reality of what I was about to undertake weighed heavily on my mind. The crew bustled around me, making final preparations for the dive. Their movements were efficient, their faces a mix of focus and unease. They were skilled professionals, but none of them would be joining me on this journey. The Deep Explorer was a one-person submersible designed for the deepest parts of the ocean, where the pressure could crush a human body in an instant. As they worked, I exchanged a few brief words with the mission leader, a stoic man named Captain Reynolds. He gave me a firm nod, a silent acknowledgement of the risks we both knew too well. This was not just another research expedition. It was a dive into the unknown, where anything could happen. I made my way to the Deep Explorer, a marvel of modern technology. Its sleek, spherical design was built to withstand the crushing forces of the deep sea, equipped with the latest in sonar, sampling arms, and high-definition cameras. Inside, the space was cramped, filled with monitors and controls that would allow me to navigate the depths and collect data. I climbed inside, feeling the slight claustrophobia that always came with being enclosed in such a tight space. The hatch sealed shut with a hiss, and for a moment, I was enveloped in silence, the only sound my own breathing. The descent began smoothly, the submersible slowly lowering into the water, leaving the sunlight behind. The world outside the thick portholes quickly darkened as I dropped deeper into the ocean. The first few hundred meters were uneventful, the familiar landscape of the upper ocean slipping past me. But as I descended further, the light from above began to fade, replaced by the dim glow of the submersible's exterior lights. The water outside turned an inky black, and I could feel the pressure mounting with every passing meter. The instruments around me hummed with data, but outside, it was as if I were suspended in a void. With the darkness came a growing sense of isolation. Communication with the Nautilus was still possible at this depth, but the signal was already starting to degrade. Captain Reynolds' voice crackled over the intercom, giving me routine updates, but even his steady presence did little to alleviate the gnawing feeling in my gut. I was completely alone in this alien world, surrounded by nothing but the vast emptiness of the deep sea. The deeper I went, the more oppressive the environment became. The Mariana Trench was not just a physical place. It was a psychological challenge, a test of endurance and mental fortitude. At around 3,000 meters, I began to notice the first signs of life. Strange, translucent creatures drifted past the submersible, their bioluminescent bodies glowing faintly in the dark water. They were beautiful in a way, delicate and otherworldly, completely adapted to the harsh conditions of the deep. I recorded everything, my fingers flying over the controls as I captured video footage and logged the data. This was why I had come, to explore, to discover, to push the boundaries of what we knew about life on Earth. Yet, despite the excitement of these findings, there was an underlying tension that I couldn't shake. The sonar suddenly pinged, signaling something large moving in the distance. I adjusted the sensors, trying to get a clearer reading. The monitors showed a vague shape, something massive, hovering just beyond the range of the submersible's lights. I squinted at the screen, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. It was moving slowly, almost lazily, but there was a deliberate quality to its movements that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I directed the lights toward it, and for a brief moment, I saw it, enormous legs, like those of a crab, stretching out into the darkness. And then, just as quickly as it appeared, it was gone. A shiver ran down my spine as I processed what I had just seen. Crabs that size didn't exist, not in any documented part of the ocean. My mind raced, trying to come up with a logical explanation, but nothing fit. This was something new, something that defied our understanding of marine biology. The excitement of discovery was tempered by a growing sense of unease. Whatever that creature was, it was far bigger than anything I had expected to encounter on this mission. I tried to calm myself, focusing on the data I was collecting. But the image of those enormous legs lingered in my mind, a constant reminder that I was venturing into a place that no human had ever truly understood. The pressure outside the submersible was now immense, the water so dense that it felt more like being buried alive than floating in the ocean. Every creak of the sub's hull sent a spike of anxiety through me, though I knew it was designed to withstand these conditions. Yet the knowledge did little to ease the feeling that I was an intruder in a world that was not meant for me. As I continued my descent, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. It was an irrational thought, I told myself, the result of the isolation and the extreme environment. But no matter how many times I repeated that in my head, the sense of being observed persisted. I found myself glancing nervously at the monitors, half expecting to see those massive legs reappear at any moment. The realization hit me then, with a clarity that was both sobering and terrifying. I was truly alone down here, with no one to help if something went wrong. The submersible continued its descent into the darkness, and I forced myself to focus on the mission. There was still a long way to go before reaching the bottom of the trench, and I had to be ready for whatever I might find there. But the weight of what I had already seen pressed down on me, a constant reminder that the ocean was not just a place of wonder, but also of unimaginable dangers. As I prepared to go deeper, I couldn't help but wonder what else lay hidden in the depths, waiting to be discovered, or to discover me. The tension from the earlier encounter hung heavily in the air as I continued my descent. I couldn't shake the image of those massive, crab-like legs from my mind. Every shadow cast by the submersible's lights seemed to hide something. Every distant blip on the sonar sent my heart racing. But I pressed on, reminding myself that this was what I had trained for. Exploration meant stepping into the unknown, facing the dangers that lurked there. Yet, even with all my experience, I couldn't help but feel a growing sense of dread as I ventured deeper into the trench. As I approached the bottom of the Mariana Trench, the environment around me became even more alien. The seafloor was a desolate, rocky landscape, devoid of the vibrant life found in shallower waters. The submersible's lights illuminated strange formations, pillars of rock that rose like silent sentinels from the abyss. But it was the movement detected by the sonar that drew my attention. The readings were inconsistent, as if whatever was out there was trying to stay just out of sight. I adjusted the sensors, determined to get a clearer view. What I saw next sent a chill through me. The vague shapes on the monitor began to coalesce into something more defined, more deliberate. The lights of the submersible revealed not just one creature, but several, each enormous, far larger than any known species. At first, they appeared to be giant crabs, but as the lights caught them fully, I realized with horror that these were not mere crustaceans. They were humanoid, with elongated limbs that ended in sharp, claw-like appendages. Their bodies were covered in a hard, shell-like exoskeleton, but their movements were unnervingly fluid, almost graceful in the way they navigated the rocky terrain. I sat frozen, my hands gripping the controls as I watched these creatures with a mix of awe and fear. They moved with purpose, not like animals, but as if they were scouting, observing. It was then that I noticed something even more disturbing. Their heads, elongated and insect-like, were equipped with multiple eyes, all of which were focused on the submersible. These beings were intelligent, of that I was certain. There was a pattern to their movements, a coordination that suggested communication, though I couldn't hear or see how they did it. The rhythmic way they moved in unison, like a well-practiced dance, was both mesmerizing and terrifying. Panic started to creep in as one of the creatures began to approach the submersible, its many legs moving with terrifying speed across the seafloor. I knew I had to do something, but every option seemed fraught with danger. I could try to move the submersible, but that might provoke them. I could stay still and hope they lost interest, but their intent gaze suggested otherwise. My training told me to stay calm, to assess the situation rationally, but my instincts screamed at me to get out of there. As the creature neared, it reached out with one of its long, clawed arms, tapping against the submersible's hull. The sound reverberated through the small cabin, a metallic clang that made me flinch. My breath caught in my throat as the creature's head turned slightly, as if listening. The realization that it might be trying to communicate with me was almost too much to bear. The weight of the situation pressed down on me. This wasn't just an encounter with a new species. This was something far more significant, far more dangerous. Without thinking, I reached for the controls of the submersible's robotic arm, intending to gently push the creature away. But as the arm extended, the creature reacted instantly, recoiling with a speed that defied its size. The others, which had been observing from a distance, suddenly surged forward, their movements no longer slow and deliberate but fast and aggressive. The submersible rocked as they closed in, their bodies slamming against the hull with alarming force. I could hear the metal creaking under the strain, and for a moment, I thought the submersible might be torn apart. My heart pounded in my chest as I desperately tried to retract the robotic arm, my hands trembling on the controls. The submersible lurched again as another blow struck its side, and I realized with growing horror that I was under attack. These creatures were not just curious. They were hostile, and they had the power to destroy the deep explorer. I had to act quickly if I was going to survive. The isolation I had felt earlier now became a crushing weight. There was no one to help me, no backup, no rescue team waiting in the wings. The communication link with the Nautilus was severed, leaving me completely alone in this nightmarish situation. The walls of the submersible felt like they were closing in on me, the darkness outside pressing in on all sides. I had never felt so vulnerable, so utterly at the mercy of forces beyond my control. In a last-ditch effort, I hit the emergency ascent button, praying that the sudden movement would be enough to deter the creatures. The submersible's thrusters roared to life, and I was thrown back against my seat as it shot upwards. For a brief, terrifying moment, the creatures clung to the hull, their claws scraping against the metal. But as the submersible gained speed, they finally let go, disappearing into the darkness below. Relief flooded through me, but it was short-lived. The ascent was fast, too fast, and I knew that the rapid change in pressure could be just as deadly as the creatures I was fleeing from. I forced myself to slow the ascent, knowing that the danger wasn't over yet. My hands were still shaking as I adjusted the controls, trying to regain some semblance of control over the situation. As the submersible rose through the water, leaving the creatures behind, I couldn't help but feel a deep sense of unease. I had escaped with my life, but the encounter had left me shaken to my core. These beings were unlike anything I had ever encountered, intelligent and deadly in ways I could never have imagined. The Mariana Trench, once a place of scientific curiosity, had revealed itself to be something far more sinister, a world where the rules of nature as we understood them no longer applied. The darkness of the trench receded as I continued my ascent, but the fear remained, gnawing at the edges of my mind. I had come here seeking knowledge, but what I had found instead was a nightmare, a glimpse into a world that was not meant for human eyes. And as the submersible climbed higher, drawing closer to the surface, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had only just scratched the surface of the horrors that lay hidden in the depths. The submersible's ascent through the dark waters felt agonizingly slow, despite the rapid speed at which I had initiated the emergency climb. The deep explorer groaned under the strain, its systems straining against the immense pressure that still surrounded it. I kept my eyes glued to the monitors, every fiber of my being focused on getting back to the surface. But the relief I'd felt moments ago was rapidly fading as a new terror began to take hold. The creatures were following me. The sonar pinged erratically, showing multiple large objects moving quickly from below. My heart leaped into my throat as I saw them. The same creatures that had attacked me now racing upwards, closing the distance with alarming speed. I tried to push the submersible harder, but I knew the risk. Ascending too quickly could cause catastrophic damage, not just to the vessel but to me as well. The sudden change in pressure could lead to decompression sickness, or worse, structural failure of the Deep Explorer itself. My thoughts raced as I struggled to come up with a plan. The creatures were fast, far faster than anything I had encountered before in the deep. They seemed to be using their many limbs to propel themselves through the water with a speed and agility that defied their size. The rhythmic, pulsating movements that had mesmerized me earlier were now a terrifying reminder of their relentless pursuit. I could feel the vibrations through the submersible's hull, their approach growing closer with each passing second. In a desperate bid to shake them off, I decided to use the submersible's thrusters to create a diversion. I aimed for a nearby rock formation, using the last of the sub's lateral thrust to jettison an expendable piece of equipment, a small drone used for sampling. I released it, hoping it might distract them long enough for me to gain some distance. The drone shot out of the submersible, its lights flickering as it sped away. For a moment, it seemed to work. The creatures hesitated, some turning to follow the new target. But my relief was short-lived. Most of them ignored the drone entirely, their focus still locked on me. The submersible shuddered violently as one of the creatures made contact, its massive claws scraping against the hull. The noise was deafening, a screech of metal on metal that sent waves of panic through me. I gritted my teeth, forcing myself to stay calm as I pushed the sub's engines to their limits. The Deep Explorer shot upwards again, the ascent now feeling like a race against time. But the creatures were relentless. They swarmed around the submersible, their bodies a blur of movement on the monitors. Every time I thought I'd gained some distance, another would close in, striking the hull with a force that shook the entire vessel. I could feel the pressure inside the sub-building, the air becoming thick and hard to breathe. The temperature was rising too, the systems overheating under the strain. I had to do something, or I would never make it out alive. I scanned the controls, my mind racing as I considered my options. The submersible had one last trick up its sleeve, a set of emergency flares designed to disorient large predators. It was a gamble, but at this point, I had nothing left to lose. With a deep breath, I activated the flares, watching as they burst out from the sub, illuminating the water around me in a brilliant, blinding light. The effect was immediate. The creatures recoiled, their movements becoming erratic as they were caught off guard by the sudden burst of light. I seized the opportunity, pushing the submersible harder than ever, the engines whining in protest as I made a final desperate ascent. The sonar showed the creatures falling behind, disoriented and confused by the flares. For the first time since the attack began, I felt a glimmer of hope. Perhaps I could outrun them after all. But the relief was tempered by the knowledge that the submersible was nearing its limits. The strain was too much, and I could hear the systems struggling to keep up. The lights flickered, and the monitors began to glitch, the data feeds becoming a jumble of static and interference. I was pushing the Deep Explorer to the brink, and I knew that if it failed, there would be no second chances. The ascent felt endless, every second stretching into eternity, as I willed the submersible to climb faster. I kept my eyes on the depth gauge, watching as the numbers slowly ticked down. 8,000 meters, then 7,000. Each meter gained felt like a small victory, but the creatures were still there, just behind me, relentless in their pursuit. As I neared 6,000 meters, the Deep Explorer shuddered violently, the hull groaning as it struggled to withstand the pressure. I could feel the temperature rising even further, the air thick with the scent of overheated electronics. The creatures were still close, their presence a constant threat, but they seemed to be losing interest, their movements slowing as if they were reaching their limit. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the submersible broke through the critical depth, the pressure easing as I rose closer to the surface. The creatures were no longer in pursuit, their shapes fading into the darkness below. I allowed myself a moment of relief, my body sagging in the seat as the adrenaline began to wear off. But I knew I wasn't safe yet. The submersible was in bad shape, and I still had several thousand meters to go before I would reach the surface. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my shaking hands as I adjusted the controls. The Deep Explorer was damaged, but it was still functional, and I was determined to make it back to the Nautilus. I set the sub on a slower, more controlled ascent, monitoring the systems closely as I climbed. The creatures had disappeared, but their presence lingered in my mind, a reminder of the horrors that lurked in the depths of the trench. As I continued my slow ascent, I couldn't help but replay the events in my mind. The creatures, their intelligence, their relentless pursuit, none of it made sense. They were unlike anything we had ever encountered in the ocean, defying all our understanding of deep-sea life. And yet, they were real. I had seen them with my own eyes, felt the impact of their attacks, and barely escaped with my life. The thought that these beings could exist, hidden away in the darkest corners of the earth, was as terrifying as it was awe-inspiring. The Deep Explorer finally neared the surface, the water around me growing lighter as I rose toward the light of day. But the fear and tension from the encounter remained, a constant reminder of the dangers that still awaited me. I had survived the trench, but I knew that the ocean held many more secrets, secrets that humanity was not yet ready to uncover. As I prepared to surface, I couldn't shake the feeling that my journey was far from over. The creatures were out there, and they had seen me. The surface of the ocean finally broke above me as the Deep Explorer emerged from the depths, and for a moment, I was blinded by the sudden influx of light. The transition from the crushing darkness of the trench to the open air was jarring, and it took me a few moments to adjust. The submersible bobbed gently on the waves, the salt spray misting over the portholes as I slowly brought the vessel to a halt. I felt a profound sense of relief, like I had been holding my breath for hours and could finally exhale. The sight of the Nautilus, a reassuring silhouette against the horizon, was a welcome reminder that I had made it back, though not unscathed. The crew was already preparing to recover the Deep Explorer. I could see them moving about on the deck, their faces tense with anticipation. As they began the delicate process of winching the submersible out of the water, I realized just how much I had been through. My body ached, my mind felt frayed, and I knew that the ordeal had left its mark on me in ways I was only beginning to understand. The horror of what I had encountered in the trench was still fresh, the images of those creatures replaying in my mind with unsettling clarity. When the hatch finally opened, I was greeted by Captain Reynolds' stern face, his eyes searching mine for any sign of what had happened. I climbed out of the submersible with shaky legs, my body protesting every movement. The crew helped me down, their questions hovering in the air, but I was too exhausted to answer. All I could do was nod weakly as they led me to the ship's medical bay, where a doctor quickly checked me over. Physically, I was mostly fine. Some bruises from being tossed around in the sub, a few scratches where equipment had come loose. But mentally, I felt like I was still trapped in the abyss. After the brief examination, I was ushered into the debriefing room. The walls were stark white, the air cold and sterile, a sharp contrast to the chaotic primal environment I had just escaped. Captain Reynolds and a few other senior officers were there, their faces a mixture of concern and skepticism. They needed answers, and they needed them now. I could tell that they were struggling to reconcile what they knew about the ocean with the impossible things I was about to tell them. I began to recount the events of the dive, my voice trembling slightly as I spoke. I told them about the initial descent, the strange creatures I had seen, and the horrifying realization that they were not just animals but something far more intelligent and organized. As I described the attack and my desperate escape, I could see the doubt creeping into their expressions. The data I had managed to collect was incomplete, corrupted by the rapid ascent and the damage to the sub. There was nothing concrete to back up my story, just my word and a few blurry images that could easily be dismissed as anomalies. Their skepticism was palpable. One of the officers, a scientist I had worked with for years, shook his head slowly, his voice laced with disbelief. "Are you sure what you saw wasn't a trick of the light, or perhaps a result of the extreme pressure down there? The mind can play tricks in such environments, especially when you're under stress." His words were logical, reasonable, but they stung. I had expected resistance, but it was still difficult to hear. How could I make them understand the terror I had faced, the absolute certainty that those creatures were real? I tried to stay calm, to explain that what I had seen was not a hallucination or a figment of my imagination. The creatures were real, their intelligence undeniable. But as I spoke, I could see the walls of skepticism rising higher. Without solid evidence, my story was just that, a story. And in the cold, scientific world we lived in, stories were not enough. I felt a wave of frustration and despair wash over me as I realized that my encounter with these beings might never be truly understood or believed. After what felt like hours, the debriefing ended, leaving me more drained than before. Captain Reynolds offered a few words of reassurance, but they rang hollow in my ears. The crew was already moving on, focusing on the next tasks, the next mission. For them, the dive was just another entry in a logbook, another data point in an endless sea of research. But for me, it was something far more profound, a moment that had shattered my understanding of the world. I retreated to my quarters, hoping to find some peace, but the memories of the trench haunted me. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those creatures, their cold, calculating eyes staring back at me. The rhythmic sound of their movements echoed in my mind, a constant reminder that I had encountered something beyond human comprehension. Sleep was impossible. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, my thoughts spiraling into dark places. As the Nautilus began its journey back to shore, I knew that I would have to live with these memories for the rest of my life. The ocean, once a place of wonder and discovery, now felt like a source of endless dread. What else lay hidden in its depths, waiting to be found? And more importantly, what right did we have to disturb it? The creatures had been content in their world, and I had intruded, bringing with me the arrogance of humanity's belief that we had conquered the earth. The thought that these beings might still be out there, watching, waiting, filled me with a sense of unease that I couldn't shake. As the days passed and the Nautilus drew closer to civilization, I realized that the true horror wasn't just the encounter itself. It was the knowledge that we had only scratched the surface of what lay beneath. The creatures were out there, and they were more intelligent, more dangerous than we could ever have imagined. I stood on the deck one last time before we reached port, staring out at the ocean. The water was calm, the horizon stretching endlessly, but I couldn't see it the same way anymore. The depths held secrets that were better left undiscovered, and I had brought one of those secrets to the surface. As the sun set, casting a warm glow over the waves, I knew that my life had changed forever. The Mariana Trench had shown me that the world was far more mysterious and terrifying than we had ever imagined, and I could never go back to seeing it the way I once had.